Was the Alex Pretti shooting justified? A lot of people have a lot of thoughts. I've done my best to consider those thoughts, and now I'm ready to share mine. We begin with the immigration officer being approached by two protesters. Immigration officers can make arrests for any offense against the United States, which just means if you break a federal law. That means the officer cannot arrest you for violating a state law, such as a traffic violation. First question I'll answer is, did these women violate any federal laws? The Noise Control Act of 1972 says that while primary responsibility for control of noise rests with state and local governments, federal action is essential to deal with major noise sources in commerce, control of which require national uniformity of treatment. So when we're talking about how loud you can be at a given area during a given time, that's going to be up to the state and local government. The main law that's going to apply to situations like this is 18 U.S. Code Section 111. Essentially, it just says that you can't forcibly assault, resist, oppose, impede, intimidate, or interfere with any federal officer while they're doing their official work. The Eighth Circuit, which is where this incident took place, decided that force is a necessary element of any Section 111 conviction. However, that element may be satisfied by proof of actual physical contact or by proof of such a threat that inspires fear of pain, bodily harm, or death. You could argue that by them blowing the whistle loud enough, they're inspiring fear of pain or some level of injury to the officer's ear. I don't know what the threshold of pain is. I'm sure there is one. I don't think mild discomfort is going to constitute breaking this law, but my suspicion is that they didn't reach whatever the threshold is, but I'm not sure. The CBP said that the officer ordered the females to get out of the roadway. I tried finding a federal law on this, and as far as I'm aware, as long as you're otherwise not breaking any federal laws, then when an officer tells you to do something, you don't necessarily have to do it. At least if a federal officer tells you to do something, then there's no federal law that says that you have to do it, from my understanding. Next, the officer starts pushing them to try and get them out of the roadway. According to 8 CFR Section 287.8, non-deadly force may be used only when a designated immigration officer has reasonable grounds to believe that such force is necessary. The reason that law is important is because it shows even if these women didn't break any laws, the immigration officer can still use force if they have reasonable grounds to believe that such force is necessary. Immediately after, the law says that the immigration officer must use the minimum non-deadly force necessary to accomplish their mission. CBP's stated mission at the time of this incident was to arrest this dude, and so either the reason the officer found it necessary for these people to be out of the roadway is because of one, it was getting in the way of them being able to arrest this person, or two, there was just general safety concerns with them being in the middle of the road. I don't see any reason to think by them standing there, they're like getting in the way of them arresting this dude. So I'm just going to assume that the mission is to keep these people safe, and that's why they want them out of the roadway. We're going to look at 4 separate instances of the officer pushing the women, and we're going to be analyzing that. And I'm going to have the sound off because ain't nobody trying to hear them loud, obnoxious whistles. But just as a side note to talk about the form of protesting that everybody seems to really not like, the entire point of protesting is to get people to notice, to pay attention to what you are protesting. And so if you're just sitting quietly on the side and you're just, doing your old thing, then people in the street will see you, but nobody's going to be really talking about it. And so if you want people to talk about it, the goal is kind of be as loud and obnoxious without breaking any laws to get as much attention on you as possible. And that's what they're doing, and it's very effective. So while you maybe think their reason for protesting is invalid, their form of protesting is certainly valid. Now, while we look through this video, we should be asking ourselves, is this accomplishing the officer's mission? And also, is this the minimum level of force necessary to accomplish that mission? First, here's pushes 1 and 2. These weren't extremely hard pushes, but just the fact of pushing someone hard enough to lose their footing, I think is a step up from just, walking them to the sidewalk with kind of resting your arm on their shoulder and kind of guiding them to the sidewalk. I think that was more so the minimum level of force necessary. So I actually tend to think that these first 2 pushes were excessive uses of force. While it was accomplishing the mission, it just wasn't the minimum level of force necessary. Push 3 is just more of the same. It's not like blatant, like it's not like, oh my gosh, this cop did this terrible thing. It's just like it does seem like it's a little bit excessive, and it's definitely escalatory. Like even grabbing their arm and walking them to the sidewalk is just going to be a lower, just as effective use of force. Now, this last push is the one that everyone's really angry about, and I think for good reason. They were already all away from the danger of being in the middle of the road. Like, any safety concerns now no longer exist. They're on the side of the road next to parked cars. They're not going to get hit. There's just no danger where they're at. And this level of force is so excessive. Like, he hasn't even tried to just, like, guide them. Like, it's just straight pushing. And this last force, it comes across as just pure anger. Like, there just doesn't really seem to be any justification for this level of force. And really, any level of force. Like, there was just no mission that needed to be accomplished at this point. Like, what could possibly be his justification for needing them to be on the sidewalk instead of just the side of the road? So for my answer to the question of did the woman violate any laws, I think no. And for the question of did the cop violate any laws in terms of use of force towards these women, to me, the answer is yes. Now we get on to the next question, which is, did Alex Pretti violate any laws? After the lady gets pushed to the ground, Pretti immediately steps in front of the woman, potentially touching the cop. I still don't know if he ever did touch the cop. It's possibly did. I don't think there's any clear angle that shows that he did or didn't. If Pretti made physical contact with the cop, then that means that he satisfied the force criteria, which is necessary for Section 111 conviction. But just satisfying the force criteria doesn't necessarily mean that you violated the statute. And therefore, we need to establish that it was either assault, interfering, opposing, resisting, whatever it was. We need to establish that he was also doing that on top of the forcible component. And maybe you could say he was interfering, but then you would have to say he was interfering with what? The woman was already pushed on the sidewalk. Even if it was justified in him pushing the woman on the sidewalk, what more did he want with the woman? Like, what else was he trying to do to her? Like, I don't think you could say he was interfering with anything. There was nothing to be interfered with. Whatever the officer's job was, it has to have certainly been completed by that point. And I think it was completed by the time they were on the side of the road. But she's not even on the side of the road anymore. If the officer was trying to arrest the woman, then yeah, you could say that he was interfering and you could say it was forcible. But what did the woman do that justified an arrest? There was never any physical resistance from them. There was non-compliance with verbal commands, but now you have to justify why that is a federal offense. And yeah, I've seen nothing to suggest that the officer had any justification for arresting these women. So to answer the question so far, did Pretti violate any laws? The answer to me is no. Now the next question is, did the officer break any laws here? The officer's response to Pretti standing in front of him is to immediately pepper spray him. Pretti then puts his hands up and turns away, and the cop continues to pepper spray him. He even pepper sprays the lady a little bit. Now the cop is clearly going in for the arrest, and the other cops join in. The CBP has policy on pepper spray. They say that OC spray, which is just another word for pepper spray, may be utilized as a compliance tool on a subject offering at a minimum active resistance. Breaking policy doesn't necessarily mean you're breaking the law, but it does inform what would be considered reasonable for that cop. Again, now we have to ask ourselves, what is the reason? What is the officer's mission that he's trying to accomplish with this use of force? The mission to me that would be most likely to justify this level of force would be if he was going in for the arrest already. Assuming that's his mission, the next question becomes, was this the minimum level of force necessary to complete that mission? To me, it seems like it's totally excessive, like he could just grab the guy, but let's say that it was justified initially. Pretti then immediately de-escalates by putting his hands up in the air and turning away. So to continue that use of pepper spray just seems totally unnecessary, like he is not actively resisting in any way. Now to answer the question, did the officer violate any federal laws? My answer is yes. I don't think the officer could have reasonable grounds to believe that his use of force was necessary because the entire point of the force was to effectuate an arrest, and that arrest was totally unjustified. And then even if the arrest was justified, he was not using the minimum level of force necessary to accomplish that mission, and therefore he violated that law as well. Now to answer the main question, was the shooting of Alex Pretti justified? The question is if the officer had reasonable grounds to believe that such force was necessary to protect him or other persons from the imminent danger of death or serious physical injury. There's a total of 10 shots here, and I don't think each shot is going to have the same exact analysis. So let's start with shot 1. One thing to consider is that Pretti is surrounded by about 7 or 8 cops, 5 of which are making active physical contact with him. One of those cops hitting Pretti in the head with an OC can, which yes is effective at forcing compliance, but you have other effective means of compliance. You have 5 officers with hands on him. You don't need to go to the level of force of hitting this man in the head. Another thing to notice is that Pretti got disarmed by the guy in the gray jacket right after Gray Jacket yelled. You can see Gray Jacket remove the gun from Pretti's holster, and then from another angle you can see more clearly the gun in his hand while he's running away. Some people say that first shot came from an accidental discharge when that guy in the gray jacket was running away with Pretti's gun, so that's where the gunshot came from. If that was the case, then it would obviously be justified because he can't help that, like it just happened. If it was coming from an officer intentionally shooting, it'd probably be this man who's, pointing his gun at Alex Pretti. This is the same man who has a clear view of Alex Pretti's holster, which is empty. You can see his head shift slightly down and see, as the officer was saying, gun, gun, gun. You could see the officer's hand on the gun. He saw it get removed. Let's assume the officer didn't see the gun get removed. He heard gun, gun, gun. And in this situation, would he be able to perceive Pretti as an imminent threat? Well, we see Pretti surrounded by about 6 officers. 2 of those officers have active hands on him, 4 of the officers being extremely close. The only way that it seems like he could turn around, pull out a gun, turn around, and shoot one of these officers if he's able to break free of the hold and maneuver his body in this way where he can he's double jointed or some shit and can just rip. I don't even know. I don't know how to make the case for this. Yeah, just based on the fact that Pretti was just totally incapable of really doing anything, I don't see how shot 1 is justified. Now, seeing as Pretti attempted to stand up after that first shot, it makes me think either it has to have been that accidental discharge or that officer that shot at him totally missed. Because, if you get shot in the back, your probably instinct isn't probably to stand up. It's probably to go limp or fall down or go flat or something like that. Now, these next 3 shots all kind of happened at the same time. In slow-mo, it's going to look like it took longer, but essentially it all happened in a single moment, and so I'm going to kind of look at all 3 of these shots as the same. You can clearly see who these shots come from this time, the officer shooting Pretti in the back. Another hint that this all happened at the same time is the fact that the lady doesn't start screaming until the 3rd shot, which means by the time the first shot registered, in her mind, the officer had already shot him 3 times. One possible justification is the fact that Pretti seems to reach his arm behind him where his waistband would be. The only problem is that the officer who shot him has an unobstructed, clear view of that waistband and can see that there's no gun. The other fact is that Pretti is still being restrained. You have 2 officers who have hands on Pretti, and in Pretti's position, he's not really in a straightforward position where he can grab the gun and pull it out and shoot. He's kind of in an unorthodox, restrained position to where that cop who has the gun pointed at him could wait until he actually pulls a gun out and brandishes it before that officer shoots. He doesn't need to predict that Pretti's going to shoot it. He has enough time, due to the fact that Pretti's being restrained, to actually wait until the gun becomes visible. And Pretti seems to break some sort of restraint to where he actually becomes that imminent threat before that cop fires. So considering the fact that the officer had vision of the absence of a gun and that Pretti wasn't even able to quickly pull out a gun and shoot, therefore he wasn't an imminent threat, and the fact of his restraint, I think that these 3 shots were all unjustified. Now, for the last 6 shots, which to me are the most clear-cut case of unjustified use of force. Just pay attention to Pretti's body after he gets shot that 3rd time and see if he moves or shows any sign of being an imminent threat. That's one angle that just shows him fall, like clearly going limp, like the dude is out. Here's a better angle. You can see his body just not moving at all for those last 6 shots.
They're screaming. It's chaotic.
Some people might make the argument that once you like start shooting, like the officer didn't realize the threat was gone, but like between shot 1 and 10, there was like 5 full seconds. That is more than enough time to reassess and think like, okay, is this person a threat anymore? Which he clearly wasn't. So to answer the question, was the shooting of Alex Pretti justified? I think every single bullet was unjustified. That doesn't mean that I think it's beyond a reasonable doubt, which is required in court to get a conviction. I'm just saying if you're actually trying to figure out was a law broken, to me it seems yes. I don't know if it's enough. Certainly aspects of it are not enough to be beyond a reasonable doubt. Which I think is good that the courts do it that way. But my analysis is not what the court should convict. My analysis is what is actually true. I'm open to changing my mind. You know, I'm not an expert in any of this. This is just me spending a bunch of research and listening to experts and what they say and what they think and trying to read through the case law and all this stuff. Everything is in my Notion, all my reasons, everything is there for you to look at. I have links for everything that I've sourced throughout the video, so you can look at it for yourself. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.